So I need to tell someone about this complete disaster, because honestly, 3 years later, I'm still trying to figure out what the hell happened and why everything went so wrong. I'm Sabrina, I'm 34 now, and I just lived through what I thought was going to be the beginning of my happily ever after, but turned into the most confusing and devastating rejection of my entire life. It started when I met Trevor on one of those dating apps where people actually write real profiles instead of just posting gym selfies. He was 32, worked in logistics or supply chain something, and his profile showed he had actual personality and interests beyond sports and drinking. Our first date was at this cute little place downtown. Nothing fancy, but he'd clearly put thought into picking somewhere with atmosphere instead of suggesting we grab drinks at whatever sports bar was convenient. Right from the start, Trevor was different from every other guy I'd been dating. He asked real questions about my work and client services, remembered details from our text conversations, and seemed genuinely interested in my answers instead of just waiting for his turn to talk about himself. The conversation flowed so naturally that we stayed until they were literally putting chairs on tables around us. When he walked me to my car and gave me this perfect first kiss that wasn't too aggressive but definitely left me wanting more, I felt that spark I hadn't experienced in years. What really got me was how he texted the next day, instead of playing those stupid waiting games that dating coaches tell guys to do. He said he had a great time and wanted to see me again soon, which felt so refreshingly honest and mature. When he suggested cooking dinner at his place for our second date, I was nervous because usually that's code for skipping the getting to know you part, but something about Trevor felt different. His apartment was actually clean and organized, which already put him ahead of most single guys I'd dated. He cooked a real meal, not just heated up takeout, and we talked for hours about everything from family dynamics to travel dreams to random childhood memories. But the chemistry between us was absolutely insane. Every time our hands brushed while we were cooking together or cleaning dishes, I felt this electric connection that was impossible to ignore. I know what you're thinking, and yes, we ended up sleeping together that night. Normally I have this rule about waiting longer, but honestly at 31, I was tired of playing games and pretending I didn't want what I wanted. The chemistry was undeniable, and he was so attentive and focused on making sure I was comfortable and enjoying myself. It felt natural and right, not rushed or sleazy like it usually does when guys pressure you too early. The next morning he made coffee, and we sat on his balcony, talking about weekend plans, like it was the most natural thing in the world. He didn't do that weird thing where guys become distant and awkward after sex, trying to get you out the door as fast as possible. He seemed genuinely happy I was there and kept finding little excuses to touch my hand or brush hair out of my face. When I finally left, he kissed me goodbye and said he couldn't wait to see me again. Over the next 6 weeks, we fell into this amazing routine. We'd see each other 2 or 3 times per week, always ending up intimate, with Trevor planning these thoughtful dates like hiking trails, concerts, trying new restaurants. He remembered that I loved live music and would surprise me with tickets to shows by bands I'd never heard of, but always ended up enjoying. What I loved most was how comfortable we became with each other so quickly. I could show up at his place in sweats with no makeup, and he'd still look at me like I was the most beautiful woman in the world. We developed inside jokes and silly rituals, like how he'd always make me taste whatever he was cooking, even though he was clearly the better cook. When we watched movies together, I'd curl up against him, and he'd play with my hair absent-mindedly, which made me feel so safe and cared for. Our physical connection kept getting better, too. We had this natural rhythm and chemistry that I'd never experienced with anyone before. He was generous and attentive, and seemed to genuinely enjoy making me happy in every way. I felt completely comfortable being vulnerable with him, which was huge for me because I'd always been self-conscious with previous partners. But here's where things started getting complicated in my head. We'd been seeing each other consistently for almost 2 months, going on dates regularly, being intimate multiple times per week, and acting like a couple in every way that mattered. Yet we'd never actually defined what we were or talked about being exclusive. I started getting anxious about the fact that, technically, he could still be dating other people, even though his behavior suggested he wasn't. My coworker had just gotten engaged to a guy she'd been dating for 6 months, and seeing her ring made me realize how much I wanted that kind of security and commitment. I found myself getting jealous when Trevor mentioned female colleagues, or when women would flirt with him when we were out together. I'd smile and act cool on the outside, but inside, I'd be thinking about how I wanted everyone to know he was taken. The uncertainty started eating at me. I'd analyze his text messages for clues about his feelings, wondering if he was being less affectionate or taking longer to respond. When he'd mentioned plans with friends that didn't include me, I'd feel this stab of insecurity about whether I was really as important to him as he seemed to be to me. I wanted to bring up the exclusivity conversation, but I was terrified of scaring him away. My friends kept asking about my boyfriend, and I'd have to awkwardly explain that we weren't officially together yet, which made me feel embarrassed and unsure. I hated not being able to give a clear answer about our relationship status after 2 months of consistent dating. It made me feel like I was just some casual fling to him, even though his actions suggested otherwise. The more I thought about it, the more frustrated I became. Here I was, giving him all the benefits of having a girlfriend: my time, my attention, my body, my emotional energy, without getting the security and commitment I needed in return. I started feeling like I was auditioning for the role of his girlfriend instead of being chosen for it. Finally, after our 10th date, I decided I couldn't take the uncertainty anymore. We'd just finished dinner, and were back at his apartment sharing wine, when I brought up wanting to talk about where things were heading. I told him I was starting to develop real feelings and wanted to know if we were on the same page about building something serious together. Trevor got this surprised look on his face, like he hadn't been expecting this conversation. He said he really liked me and could see potential for something long-term, but felt like 2 months wasn't enough time to make such a big decision about exclusivity and commitment. He said he wanted to keep getting to know me better before putting labels on things, and that he'd been burned by rushing into relationships too quickly in the past. The rejection stung more than I expected. I felt like I'd been giving him everything a girlfriend would give, and he was basically saying it wasn't enough to earn that title yet. I started questioning whether he was just keeping his options open in case someone better came along, or enjoying all the benefits of a relationship without having to commit to one. After that conversation, something shifted in how I felt about our physical relationship. Every time we were intimate, I found myself thinking about how vulnerable and exposed I was with someone who wouldn't even call me his girlfriend. I started feeling like I was giving away something precious without getting the emotional security I needed in return. So I made a decision that felt empowering at the time, but looking back might have been where everything went wrong. I decided to take control of the situation by removing physical intimacy from our relationship until Trevor was ready to commit to being exclusive. It seemed logical that if he wanted to keep things casual and undefined, then I shouldn't be giving him the level of intimacy that belonged in a committed relationship. During our next date, I told him that continuing to be intimate without any commitment was starting to make me feel uncomfortable, like I was putting myself in a vulnerable position without getting the security I needed. I explained that I needed to step back from that aspect until we were both ready to be exclusive and official. I expected him to understand my perspective, maybe even respect me for setting boundaries. I thought he might realize what he'd be missing and decide he was ready to take the next step. Instead, Trevor got really quiet and distant. He said he understood my position, but seemed hurt that I was changing the terms of our relationship. He asked if this meant we were just going to be friends now, and when I said we could still date without the physical component, he looked confused and frustrated. He said he felt like I was using our physical relationship as leverage to force a commitment he wasn't ready for yet, which made him uncomfortable. I tried to explain that wasn't my intention, that I was just protecting my emotional well-being, but he seemed to interpret it as manipulation regardless. Over the next few days, I could feel him pulling away completely. Our texts became shorter and less frequent. He stopped making plans beyond a day or two in advance. When we did see each other, there was this weird tension where the easy comfort we'd had before was completely gone. I started panicking that my strategy was backfiring, but I felt like I couldn't back down without looking desperate. The final blow came when I tried reaching out about weekend plans and discovered he'd blocked me on everything. Not just unfriended me, but completely blocked me, so I couldn't see his profiles at all. The shock hit me like a physical blow. I sat there staring at user not found messages, trying to process that he'd chosen to cut off all contact rather than work through our issues. I felt humiliated and confused. How had we gone from planning dates and talking about getting to know each other better to him blocking me entirely in the span of a week? Every attempt I made to contact him confirmed that he'd made a deliberate decision to cut me out of his life completely. The rejection was devastating in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't just that he didn't want to be my boyfriend. It was that he decided I wasn't even worth maintaining any connection with. I felt thrown away like garbage, completely disposable to someone who'd seemed to genuinely care about me just days before. I started obsessing over what had gone wrong and whether there was anything I could have done differently. The hardest part was feeling like I'd been used. For 2 months, I'd given him everything, emotionally and physically. And the moment I asked for something in return, just basic commitment, he'd bailed completely. I couldn't stop thinking about how unfair the whole situation was. I'd been honest about my feelings and needs, tried to communicate maturely, and been punished for it with complete abandonment. Meanwhile, he got to walk away having enjoyed months of girlfriend-level treatment without ever having to commit to anything. Months passed and I tried to move on, but every date felt disappointing compared to what I'd had with Trevor. Other guys seemed immature or inconsiderate or just not as naturally compatible. I kept comparing everyone to him and finding them lacking, which made it impossible to develop genuine interest in anyone new. My friends got tired of hearing about the situation pretty quickly. They kept telling me I was better off without someone who couldn't appreciate what I had to offer. But that didn't make the loss hurt any less. Some even suggested that maybe I'd been too demanding too quickly, which made me feel defensive and misunderstood. Then, about 6 months after Trevor blocked me, I ran into him at a coffee shop downtown. My heart immediately started racing when I spotted him in line, but what really destroyed me was seeing the woman next to him. She was pretty in an understated way, laughing at something he'd said, and they had this easy, comfortable energy that was unmistakably couple-like. When she reached over to fix his collar and he smiled at her like she was the most precious thing in the world, I knew immediately that this was his girlfriend. I stood there frozen, watching them interact with the kind of natural intimacy I'd thought Trevor wasn't capable of or ready for. What made it infinitely worse was overhearing that they'd been together for 6 months, which meant he'd started dating her almost immediately after ending things with me. And when someone he recognized approached them, he introduced her as his girlfriend without any hesitation or awkwardness. I felt this overwhelming urge to make my presence known, so I walked over and said hello, like it was just a casual encounter. Trevor looked genuinely surprised and not entirely comfortable. He was polite but distant, introducing me as someone I used to date, without any warmth. I tried to make some subtle dig about how Trevor had commitment issues when we were together, hoping to plant seeds of doubt. But his girlfriend just laughed and said something about how he'd been the one pushing for exclusivity in their relationship from early on, how he'd introduced her to his family after just 2 months because he was so sure about her. That conversation completely shattered my remaining illusions. Hearing that Trevor was not only capable of commitment, but had actively pursued it with someone else, made me realize that the problem hadn't been his readiness for a relationship. It had been his readiness for a relationship with me specifically. I left feeling more rejected and worthless than when he'd first blocked me. It was devastating to discover he just hadn't wanted to commit to me. Everything I'd told myself about him being emotionally unavailable was clearly just a story I'd made up to protect my ego. The reality was that I hadn't been enough for him. Over the following weeks, I became obsessed with finding out more about their relationship. I created fake accounts to stalk their profiles, looking for signs of problems. Instead, I found endless evidence of their perfect compatibility. Photos of them hiking together, attending family events, traveling to places he'd never suggested we visit. What hurt most was seeing how happy he looked with her. In every photo, Trevor had this genuine smile and relaxed energy that I didn't remember seeing much when we were together. It was like he'd found his person and could finally be completely himself. My dating life became a series of failed connections as I unconsciously measured every new guy against Trevor. I'd go on dates and spend the entire time comparing their conversation skills, their looks, their career prospects to what I'd had with him. Nobody seemed as naturally compatible or exciting, which made it impossible to develop real interest in anyone new. I even tried therapy for a while, but when the therapist started suggesting that I examine my own role in how things ended, I got defensive and stopped going. I didn't want to hear about how my ultimatum might have been manipulative or how my expectations might have been unrealistic for a 2-month relationship. 2 years later, I heard through mutual connections that Trevor and his girlfriend got engaged. According to the person who told me, he proposed during a vacation to the same hiking spot where they'd had one of their first dates. The ring was gorgeous, the proposal was thoughtful and personal, and she said yes immediately, because they'd already talked extensively about marriage. I spent that entire weekend in bed, crying over losing someone I still think could have been my soulmate if he'd just given us more time. I keep wondering what my life would look like now if I'd been more patient, if I'd trusted that his feelings would develop naturally instead of trying to force a commitment. But even now, I can't fully accept that I did anything wrong. I was honest about my needs and boundaries, which is what everyone says you're supposed to do in relationships. I refused to settle for undefined casual dating when I was ready for something serious, which seems mature and self-respecting. The worst part is how isolated I've become in my bitterness. My closest friends have stopped setting me up because they're tired of hearing me tear apart perfectly decent guys for not being Trevor. My sister tried to have an intervention last Christmas, telling me I needed to stop living in the past, but she's been married since she was 25. So what does she know about dating in your 30s? 3 months ago, I found out Trevor and his fiancée bought a house together in the suburbs. The same area where he'd once mentioned wanting to live someday when we talked about future dreams. Seeing that he was building the exact life I'd imagined having with him, just with someone else, sent me into a depression that lasted weeks. The unfairness of it all still makes me angry. I gave him the best of myself for 2 months, was vulnerable and open and caring, and got discarded the moment I asked for basic commitment. She probably never had to wonder where she stood with him, or worry about whether he was seeing other people. Now I'm 34, still single, watching all my friends settle into marriages and family life, while I'm stuck reliving a relationship that ended 3 years ago. I know people think I should move on, but I can't let go of the hope that somehow Trevor will realize he made a mistake and come back to me. I still have his number saved in my phone, even though he blocked me everywhere else. Sometimes late at night, I'll type out messages I never send, telling him how much I miss him, or asking if he ever thinks about what we had together. I know it's pathetic, but I can't seem to delete his contact information. The hardest part is knowing that he's probably never thought about me since the day he blocked me, while I've spent 3 years unable to move on from 2 months we spent together. His life moved forward seamlessly, while mine got stuck in this loop of longing and resentment. People keep telling me I'll find someone better, but honestly, I'm starting to doubt that's true. At my age, most of the good guys are already taken. I had my chance with someone amazing, and I ruined it by being too demanding too quickly. Now, I'm paying the price for not being more patient and understanding of his timeline. Last week, I drove past the coffee shop where I saw them together, and I couldn't help thinking about how different my life could have been if I'd just handled things better. If I'd been more mature about his need for time, more understanding of his perspective, more willing to let things develop naturally instead of forcing my timeline on him. But here I am, 3 years later, still alone and bitter, while he's planning a wedding with someone who was probably just more patient and understanding than I was. Someone who let him come to commitment on his own terms instead of demanding it as proof of his feelings. Someone who was secure enough in herself to not need constant validation and labels to feel valued. The worst part is that I'm still angry at him for not choosing me, even though I know deep down that my approach probably pushed him away. I'm angry that he found love so easily with someone else, while I'm still struggling to connect with anyone. I'm angry that he gets to be happy while I'm stuck in this cycle of resentment and loneliness that I can't seem to break free from. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever stop missing what we had, or wondering what might have been if I'd just been different, better, more patient. But mostly, I'm just tired of being the single friend who shows up alone to everything while everyone else has moved on to building the lives I thought I'd have by now.